So, you open Google Chrome on your phone, you're rushing to buy tickets to a concert that all your friends are going to. Picture yourself now, crowd surfing to the front, being invited onto the stage, backstage the world tour, and before you know it, you're dancing in Tokyo. Wait, what? 3 tickets left? It's a good thing your saved payment details autofill quickly and securely. There's no place like Chrome. Download Google Chrome on your phone.
It's not a rumor. I'm back. And in my first Netflix show, Fuba, ready to get pumped up to crush every episode, to see things explode before you, and to burst out laughing with your women. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you're only gonna get all of the high-octane action that I have to offer. Bullet trains, helicopter chases, pure unfiltered action. So put that cookie down, get to the chopper, and watch Fuba May 25th, only on Netflix.
To those who celebrate, if there is such a thing called celebrating Wednesday, but how about this? We'll try this. Happy hump day to those who celebrate. I'm just trying to make the best of a Wednesday because when you're on this podcast, there's always something to have fun with, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking about the Bengals defense, expectations, benchmarks, and predictions. Pretty much a repeat of yesterday's pod with a little defensive twist. And if you missed that, including a great conversation with Cordell Volson, make sure you tune into that wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome into another Wednesday edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick bringing you all the action once again. And this is a fun promotion that I just want to keep reiterating to our listeners. If you haven't heard about it already, we are doing something through cleveland.com where we are asking you, the listener, the reader, the fan, why are you a Bengals fan? The way we want you to fill out this sort of survey, because it's a survey, is you go to strictlystripes.com and there's a Google Doc form that asks you why you're a Bengals fan, when you became a fan, and what the Bengals mean to you. At some point, once we get enough responses here soon in the next couple of days and weeks, we're going to start sharing them on this podcast. We may even have some of the people who filled them out on this podcast. So if you have an awesome but authentic story, you just might get to be with me, Andrew, and Mike. So go to strictlystripes.com and click on the article that is titled something along the lines of why I'm a Bengals fan. That's going to be, I'm actually excited for that. And we'll see how soon we start talking about these responses, but it'll definitely change up the pace on this podcast, which I'm looking forward to. So I think when you sort of talk about the expectations and predictions of the Bengals defense, and you guys would agree with this, you have to start up front. I think where their defense struggled the most up front, where they struggled the most was up front, and up front it was especially getting to the quarterback, getting to the quarterback. They struggled very badly. They were one of the worst fronts in terms of getting to the quarterback last year in football. They had the third worst sack rate at 5.08%, and then they had the fourth fewest sacks with 30. This is the team as a whole, but obviously we're talking about the front four. Not good, and obviously Myles Murphy is here for a reason. You saw the writing on the wall with that, given how they struggled with the pass rush last year. So, I mean, you look at those numbers, you look at Myles Murphy, you hope that Joseph Ossai gets more reps, assuming he's more healthy in 2023, because obviously injuries haven't been kind to him, and you hope Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard stay healthy. With all of that in mind, what is a baseline for the bare minimum of sacks that the Bengals should have in 2023 with what they have now? Do you want to go first, Mike? Because I know you've talked a lot about the Bengals defensive line on this podcast.
Well, yeah, I mean, Lou Anarumo likes to say it was, disruption and pressure overall is what, he counted. And, he thought they did a pretty good job of that. But I would say still sacks, the sacks matter. And it's evidence of, the success doing the other things, quarterback pressures, quarterback hits, hurries, and all that. You mentioned, they were near the bottom of the league. That was just not good enough. You figure, if Hendricks does bounce back a little bit, has a couple more, Myles Murphy adds something, you get a full season from DJ Reader, you'd like to be, somewhere up 2% to try to, I don't think they're going to be a top team, to be honest. I think more middle of the pack is what you want to get a return on your investment of the guys you do have up front. And I think that probably correlates to 42 sacks, somewhere around there. So I don't expect them to be around Dallas where it's 10% of the dropbacks, they're getting to the quarterback, in large part because what they do with Parsons. But, I think that they need to sort of elevate their game at least a little bit to get towards the middle of the pack.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, to your point, Mike, the reason why I think middle of the pack is a good number is because, like, a perfect example of that is, like, look at the San Francisco 49ers defense last year. Obviously, a very loaded defense, and I think they're going to be even better this year because they added Javon Hargrave up front. But, like, their sack rate was 15th in the league, 6.63%. They were 11th in total sacks, so they were close to the top 10, but they weren't top 3. They weren't top 5. They were barely outside of the top 10. So you don't have to be like the Cowboys. You don't have to be like the Eagles, who had the most sacks with 70 and had the highest sack rate with it. Like, and I don't think that's really realistic. Like, you can't really do that with what you have with respect to Hendrickson and Hubbard and Murphy. But you cannot be in the bottom 3. You certainly can't be in the bottom 5, or let alone the bottom 10. Anything outside of the bottom 10, I think, is realistic. So if you're saying anything outside of the bottom 10, I think 40 to 45. Well, let me say this better. I think 36 to 40 is a good range. Like, do you like that range, Andrew? What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, 40 would put you middle of the pack. 40 was the 16th ranked team last year. There were a couple teams actually with 40: the Bills, the Dolphins, the Steelers, and the Chargers. So, you don't need a sizable jump. I think you kind of look at how teams have invested their resources. I mean, obviously Philly, they're just becoming the Georgia Bulldogs, and, they've done a great job kind of building that defense. And, you would expect them to be towards the top of the list. I think 70 sacks is insane. So nobody's saying that they have to do that, or even, get to the Chiefs or the Cowboys numbers of 55, 54, get up into the 50s. But, it's, pressure rates are important, and kind of disruption, like Mike mentioned that, Lewis said, and a couple other people have said, that's obviously big. But, we talked about this with Burrow yesterday. It's more than just, impacting plays. It's creating negative plays because, if you can get the quarterback on the ground, a 2nd and 10 is way different than a 2nd and 16, a 2nd and 13, a 2nd and 15, whatever. That is just, a big, big deal. So, yeah, if you can get, if you can get up to 40, I think you're feeling pretty good about where the defensive line is at.
I think that's realistic. Obviously, this is assuming DJ Reader doesn't miss 7 games like last year with a knee injury. And who knows, maybe Trey Hendrickson or Sam Hubbard get banged up at some point. You miss a game or two between them. It's the NFL. Injuries are going to happen. You don't want them to, but they just do. I think even then, though, because you have Myles Murphy, like let's say you do miss a game or two or more with Hubbard or Hendrickson, Myles Murphy won't get anywhere near their production. He can probably come close. Let's say Hendrickson had like 8.5, 9 sacks last year. I think Murphy could get half of that, maybe 3, 4 sacks. Speaking of him, like if we're looking at Murphy, what's a good benchmark for him? Like, I know it's hard to say because we don't know how often or where he's going to be used, but like 4 or 5 sacks, like, is that pretty realistic for someone like Myles Murphy next year?
Well, I think, it's hard to say because he's not going to, he's not going to show up and immediately replace, Trey Hendrickson or Sam Hubbard. Like, I think that's pretty clear. So to me, I like if you can get him to a level where, you're getting, I would even say like 5, 6, because you Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, they had 14.5 sacks last year. You probably want a little bit more production out of them. You would hope that you get a little bit more out of Osai. But those 4 together, I would say if you were to probably put a number on it, maybe 25 out of those 4 together, 30 out of those 4 would be good, just because then, you're going to get a sack from Mike Hilton off the edge. You're going to get a sack from BJ Hill or a couple sacks or Logan Wilson. So I think that if you can get those guys to 30, whether that means Murphy gets 8 or 9 and, puts himself in the conversation of, kind of one of the better rookies in this class, or whether he gets 3 or 4, he's got to be able to come in and be productive, or else, this pass rush, I don't know what they're going to be.
Yeah, I think that's, and then you're gonna say, well, what did you sort of get out of that? And I think maybe it'd be a little early for that, but it still is worth asking the question of, I don't want to say what was the point, but obviously, yeah, if you go for a first round pick like that and he can't match the production, it does raise some fair questions. When you look at the sack rate, you look at the sacks, that leads to the question of, how well can they, I guess, defend the pass. And we'll talk more about the secondary sort of later in this podcast, and we'll actually hear from a member of the Bengals secondary who I don't want to give away just yet. But I mean, as far as like allowing passing yards, I know this is obviously there's different ways to look at the stat, but they were sort of in the middle of the pack. They were like 13th or 14th in the league last year, and regular season passing yards allowed. They allowed just over 3,800, like exactly 3,828. So I mean, you're kind of in that ballpark with teams like the Broncos and the Colts and the Bears, which I don't think is bad because the Broncos actually had a better defense than people give them credit for with how bad they were as a team last year. But again, I think that's not a bad place to be, but you definitely don't want to be that low. I think you want to be a little bit higher. Do you think sort of one leads to the other? Like if you get more sacks, you get more to the quarterback, then that makes it easier to defend the pass? Because obviously I know Andrew made a good example once. Like if you can't get to the quarterback, you want to at least have good corners, good safeties who can defend receivers. But the converse is also true. If you get to the quarterback, you would naturally allow fewer passing yards, right? Like what do you think
I
would be
just
sort of a good benchmark?
I don't know that. I mean, because I think their secondary's going to be worse this year. I think there's going to be
Yeah.
a lot of growing pains. They only allowed 300 passing yards twice last season. I would expect a few teams to go, that number to increase. I think the goal would be just to limit the mistakes and try not to be much worse than that. They allowed 229 yards per game last year, 10 more, 15 more per game. Bend, don't break kind of thing, like Lou always says, and, matters about your red zone performance. Try to make it up in that way. But I think teams are going to put up more yardage just based on, this is going to be a group that hasn't played very many snaps together. Even Cam Taylor-Britt, who had experience last year, he was playing with Eli Apple. He's gone. Now Chidobe's going to be back in the lineup, we assume. So I mean, there's still a lot to work out, and we've talked a lot about the new safeties. So I think it's going to be hard for this group to match that performance. But you hope that in the red zone they can clamp down and just prevent the points.
Yeah, and that's the thing about passing yards is you can't just put it obviously all on the front four, the pass rush, because like if your secondary is not good, then you can't put that on Trey Hendrickson, you can't put that on Sam Hubbard. But I mean, like, what do you think, Andrew? Do you think it at least with the secondary, which we'll still get to, do you think having a good pass rush at least can help provide more damage control that they didn't have last year in terms of the passing game?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, both those things kind of, they kind of play off one another. If you have a good pass rush, your secondary is going to look a little bit better because if that they're getting to the quarterback quicker, you can maybe be a little bit more aggressive on routes. You don't have to give opposing teams as much cushion, and I guess vice versa. If your secondary is playing really well, and that, you have, if let's say Chidobe Awuzie kind of picks up where he was last year and he's a legit number one, if Cam Taylor-Britt takes another step, like if you're feeling good there, then, and your secondary has it locked down, maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable sending 5, sending 6, after the quarterback and trying to cause pressure that way. So, they go hand in hand. I think that they're both kind of equally related to one another. So, I mean, if you can get a boost from either one of those groups, I think it's going to help the other one.
All right, when we come back, we're going to look at some more stats involving yards allowed, but on the rushing side, talk more about the secondary, expectations for Cam Taylor-Britt as he makes a bigger leap into year 2. But before we do that, we are going to hear from Bengals safety Dax Hill, who's going to talk about his jump into year 2, what that means for him, and what it's going to be like working with new faces like Nick Scott. We'll have that conversation when we return right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. And welcome back to the Strictly Stripes podcast. I'm joined in the Bengals locker room by safety Dax Hill, who I always enjoy chatting with. Dax, good to see you. You're looking very, very strong, looking very good this offseason. That's not just a compliment. You've been looking really good in practice. I mean, what's been working for you? How have the workouts been going for you just the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it was just good being back in the building with the teammates, coming in, new season, coming in with a clear mind. So that's why I feel so good right now. You know, I came off a good offseason. You know, still in the off season, but just had a good time wherever I was working out at. I was in Tampa training for a few weeks, so I feel like they got me ready for now. So I feel good.
You talk about having a clear mind. I guess what's the difference going into year 2 versus year 1, just mentally?
I know a little bit more, know what to expect. You know, out of a long NFL season. So that's the biggest difference. Just not really knowing. You know. What to expect, but now I kind of know what to expect. So I feel like that's the biggest difference I know, and really not knowing, really just being in the unknown is like the biggest thing, you know, going to a new environment. But it's going to be the same environment, and I'm looking forward to it.
I know I asked you a while back about what it's like working with Nick. How has that chemistry developed, and how is it working now with a new teammate in Jordan Battle? What is it like having a chemistry with those two guys?
Really well. I mean, we all complement each other. We all have different games, but you know, I'm just excited to, you know, actually, you know, start practicing with those guys, seeing how they move, how they communicate, and, you know, how they are as people and, you know, as football players.
What have you learned from Nick, you know, him being a little bit more of a veteran, and then obviously Jordan being a rookie? What have you learned from Nick, and how do you sort of apply that for yourself, maybe apply that to a guy like Jordan as well?
He's come from a different type of defense, so I can hear his input on how he plays it, how they used to play it, and what works, what doesn't. Not necessarily doesn't work, but what's more efficient to do. And, you know, so I feel like just, you know, being side by side with him kind of just helps my game.
You know, this is a new chapter for the secondary. Obviously, you guys lose Vonn, you guys lose Jessie, maybe you guys lose Eli from the looks of it. I mean, a lot of new faces, a lot of new names. I guess, how much of a challenge is that? But how do you also make the best of it and get excited about having new faces like that?
Yeah, I mean, wherever you're at, you're going to have to adjust to whatever. I mean, nothing can stay the same forever, so it's just whoever you're with, you know, you're going to see them every day, just building relationships with them, and, you know, from there, just moving forward, you know, together, not being, you know, independent, but, you know, just working together and, you know, just making each other better.
You get Lou Anarumo back for the second straight year. You had him as a rookie. You get him for year 2 at the very least. Why is it so important having a guy like that with you in your second year?
You know, just seeing what he's about and how he calls defenses. You know, I'm glad, you know, to be a part of it. He's put a lot of people in good positions, and, you know, I'm excited, you know, for this season, upcoming season. So it should be a good year. You
know, I talked with Brad Robbins about this, but you're a Michigan guy. He's a Michigan guy. DJ's a Michigan guy. I think he mentioned you guys played like video games together, Nintendo GameCube back in college, or maybe that was him and DJ, but obviously you guys have a relationship. How cool is it having the Michigan bros being the Bengals bros now? Yeah, I mean, it kind of just makes everything a little bit more better. We know each other. We know each other outside of football, and, you know, it's good to see a familiar face. And so whenever you see a familiar face, you know, you feel a little bit better, you know, so I'm excited, you know, to have us all three back together. Almost forgot about Chris Evans too, right? Oh, yeah, and Chris Evans too, man. You can't forget about him. I mean, is there something to be said about, you know, you got Michigan guys, you get Jordan Battle from Alabama, you have obviously Jackson Carr, Higgins from Clemson. Is there something about just having guys from championship-winning programs being on a team like this? Like, does it make a difference? Do you see that coming from a championship program?
I remember Coach Zach Taylor, he was saying everyone's here for a reason. And so I believe, like what he said, everyone's here for a reason. You're not just here by accident. You know, everyone's here to contribute in a way that they can. So whatever that is, you know, I'm excited for it.
I guess my last question, and this has nothing to do with football. Since you've been here for over a year now, I'd imagine you've gone to a few restaurants, gone to a few places. Any restaurants you like? Any places that people need to know about if they don't know about them already?
I just tried out a new steakhouse, MRLB. That's like not too far from here. I just went there. I mean, that was like one of the best spots I've been to so far. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different restaurants out here. Obviously, Jeff Ruby's. Who else? I don't know. There's a lot of different spots I've been to. So I say Cincinnati. I mean, it's kind of growing on me.
Yeah. Did Joe Burrow put you on Jeff Ruby's?
Shoot, the veterans kind of put me on that with the rookie dinner.
Yeah, that's true. Dax, always a great conversation. Never enough time on this podcast, but really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Don't go away. We'll be right back on the Strictly Stripes podcast.
All right, thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Had a great chat with Dax Hill, who's going to make the jump into year 2, as presumably we would hope the free safety for the Bengals, as he'll be replacing Jessie Bates III, who's now gone. Speaking of Jessie Bates and Vonn Bell, you look at what those two did together, their third and best season together, and ultimately their final season together in Cincinnati. They had 148 tackles and 11 combined takeaways, so that's including interceptions and fumbles that they forced, and there was no shortage of that, especially in high-pressure situations, like we saw especially from Vonn Bell against the Patriots, for example. I don't say this to demean, Nick Scott or Dax Hill, but, Nick Scott's coming into a new defense. Lou Anarumo runs a very different defense from what the LA Rams had with Raheem Morris and Sean McVay. And then Dax Hill is actually playing safety, which he didn't do last year. He was primarily a nickel whenever they needed him in certain packages. So you look at what Bell and Bates did, and granted, this was after 3 years together and being veterans in the league. What is the realistic expectation for Scott and Hill? Is it 100 tackles combined? Is it maybe half the takeaways, like 4 or 5 takeaways, possibly 6? Like, how much do you think they can really fill the shoes of Bell and Bates?
Well, I don't know if necessarily tackles are the way to look at that. Because if you have a better front four and you get really solid play out of Logan Wilson and Germaine Pratt again, I mean, maybe those guys take some of the heat off, and Cam Taylor-Britt's a really active member of the secondary in terms of kind of getting in and playing the run. So maybe I don't know. Tackles, I don't know if is the way to look at it. Maybe you could look at interceptions. I mean, those two guys combined for 8 interceptions. You would like to have, kind of production be picked up in that regard. But then again, Cam Taylor-Britt didn't have an interception in the regular season. Mike Hilton had 1. Chidobe Awuzie didn't have any either. So, maybe you get more picks out of your corners. I just think that, it's what a successful year for Scott and for Dax Hill might not be as quantifiable. I think that there are certainly measures of that, but it might not be as quantifiable as you might think, just because, again, you can have great years out of your corners, but, that could be, that could kind of be a side effect of great play out of your cornerbacks. So, cornerbacks playing well and the safeties kind of feed off of that, putting a lid on the opposing offense. So, yeah, I'm not sure I want to put a number on it, just because I'm not sure that that's necessarily the most direct line to success.
Well, they could have terrible seasons and have 90 tackles.
Sure.
They could just be teams could be running all over them in the secondary and have to, that they're the last line of defense. They get all the tackles, but they didn't play very well. So I think it's just going to be sort of, when you kind of see it, you'll know if they're playing well. I think the team stats will tell more of the tale, and how teams play them. Also, if teams just line up to throw the ball because they see, especially deep, then obviously they feel like the weaknesses in the back end. And I don't think stats, like Andrew said, sort of tells you anything about that individually, at least.
So then, I guess, moving away from kind of the quantifiable side, we don't really know how and where they're going to use Jordan Battle. We know he'll be a safety. That's clear. He's not going to sort of be like the way they used Dax last year at nickel, but we know he's going to be safety. We don't know how he's going to be used at safety. And this is obviously, like I said, all of this is way too early to guess. But, I mean, what would you sort of want to expect from Jordan Battle? Like, what would be his best role, whether it's quantifiable or non-quantifiable, like to help fill those shoes of Jessie Bates and Vonn Bell next year in the backfield?
I think he just gets playing time, whether it's special teams or, some snaps as a backup. I just think you're looking for him to have some sort of role, and that's what you want, contributions from all your rookies, and as much as they can give you, that's what you'll take. I think if he's, could he win a competition? I think it's going to be an uphill battle, just because Hill's had an extra training camp on him and everything. But I do think you want him to have some sort of role next year in some facet.
One quantifiable stat I wanted to mention that I didn't mention earlier, because we talked about passing yards, and I don't think this is as subjective. I think there's more room to talk about this, and that's obviously rushing yards, which, if we're talking about the Bengals, it's not a bad thing, because they actually, I'm looking at this, they had the seventh best rushing defense. They allowed just over 106 yards per game. And this is even without, DJ Reader for 7 games, like we mentioned. And then obviously once he came back, the difference was very obvious, even for how well they were playing, stopping the run. I think you look at what they did against Derrick Henry, spoke for itself. Same with Nick Chubb. They are going to face those guys again. Chubb twice next year. They're going to go to Nashville and face Henry again next year. Among some of the many running backs we're going to face, I guess, do you expect them to replicate that? Or do you think they could do even better? And maybe, and this is with Myles Murphy, going back to him, maybe have a top 5 rushing defense in 2023.
So much of this defense, I think, is going to be kind of what you can do in the pass rush, because if Myles Murphy becomes a starter, or if Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard kind of keep that level of kind of total play around them and kind of boost some of their sack totals, I think you're feeling really good about kind of keeping 4 in the box. And if you start to have to stack the box because you can't get after the quarterback, I mean, then you're in a problem, because if you're putting 6 in the box, 7 in the box against the Browns, against the Titans, that's not going to be a problem when you play the Titans, because I'm not quite sure how good their offense is going to be. And by that, I mean, I think they're going to be terrible. But if you have to do that against the Browns and Nick Chubb, Deshaun Watson's probably going to eat you alive. So, I think that it's once again, it's a boring answer, but it's kind of related to one another, because, if your front 4 is playing well, you're going to be fine. If you can get after the quarterback and kind of wreak havoc up front with 4, you can allow 4.5 yards a carry, 5 yards a carry, as long as you're getting after the quarterback, kind of creating a lot of problems when on passing downs, because those are the downs that, frankly, really matter.
Yeah, I mean, they were good last year against the run. What was it? They ranked 7th. I don't know that they get in the top 5. And I don't know how dependent it is on Myles Murphy. I think it's going to be dependent on some of the other pieces and how everything gels together. Just because I think the linebackers are the same. So, I mean, I think that'll help. And then they cover, Germaine Pratt and Logan Wilson cover a lot of ground. And then you got DJ Reader up front. It's kind of your run stuffer. So I think they'll be, in that 100-yard area, which is a great spot to be. I think that's your strength. And that's what you can, try to build around. But I also think if teams just decide to throw against you and your run numbers plummet, that's not necessarily a sign of success.
Right.
But it'll be interesting to see how it all develops.
Speaking of Wilson and Pratt, this wasn't a down year for them, obviously, because Pratt had it was in a contract year, had some of the best numbers on PFF. He gets a second contract. Wilson's going into a contract year, so a lot of potential for him. But they only had 5 combined takeaways last year. I think they had 8 combined takeaways the year before. So slightly a bit of a downside. If you're looking at those two, like I said, Pratt's going into year 5, Wilson's going into year 4. Do you expect them to get, I don't know, is 10 takeaways a big ask between them? Is 8 more fair? If you're looking at those two, I know tackles are meaningless because your second line of defense, it's your job. I'm not going to go through their tackling stats. But takeaways, whether it's in coverage or ripping the ball out of Travis Kelce's hands like Pratt did, I know that's an emphasis Wilson has for himself. How much of an emphasis should it be for them?
Well, for their linebackers specifically, or for the defense? Just
for the linebackers, just Pratt and Wilson, just those two, because I want to talk about those two.
Yeah, I think getting the ball out is obviously a major key for those guys. Like you mentioned, the Travis Kelce play. That swung the game. That swung kind of a lot of things for them. I think, the way that drive was going, they were probably going to lose to Kansas City. I think, Kansas City was moving on the field, and if you don't get that turnover, I don't know. I think if you can get get some turnovers from those guys,
that was if we're talking about a top 25 play of the year, you got to put that up there.
Sure. I think that if you're, if you
Yeah, and I
can
think
get,
turnovers are kind of arbitrary. It depends on how many times the ball
I
comes
was
your
going to
way,
say
what
that, yeah.
situations. I mean, it's hard to sort of say like if they don't have 10 turnovers, they aren't having success. I just think you want them to be playmakers and make the plays that come towards them. I think that they've shown they're capable of doing that. I didn't think they were down last year, but I think they both made clutch plays in key moments. So I think you just need more of that.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's not fair to say it was a down year. Maybe that wasn't the right terminology, but numbers wise, it would appear to be that way unless you actually look at those plays. You can even look at Akeem Davis-Gaither, his pick against Baltimore, with how close that game was, massive. When he covered Mark Andrews, you can't overlook that. I guess sort of to kind of wrap this up, you talked about what to expect from Chidobe Awuzie, what to expect from Cam Taylor-Britt, especially because Britt's going into year 2. I guess when you look at Cam Taylor-Britt, since we almost are guaranteed to see him as a starter now that Eli Apple's gone and DJ Turner's still a rookie, and we'll get to Turner in a second. I mean, with Cam Taylor-Britt, if you had to put a number on him, like I know Awuzie before he got hurt year before had 64 tackles. So if you kind of use it as a benchmark, does Taylor-Britt have 40 tackles? I know it's arbitrary, and I know it's tackles or tackles, but whether it's tackles or other stats, what do you want to see from Cam Taylor-Britt in 2023, going into year 2, being a full-time starter for the first time ever?
Well, I think you kind of, the thing that you would like to see is that he has kind of number one qualities that you would want a corner to have. He played last year, and I thought early on, I think he admitted this too during the year. Early on, it kind of felt like things were flying a little bit fast for him. He wasn't really able to react as he wanted. But I think you kind of saw as the year went along, he really kind of settled into a role. But you need to see that he can be a number one corner in this league because Cheeto's coming up on a contract year. This is the last year of his deal. They just drafted DJ Turner II out of Michigan in the second round. And, for, kind of how they see the roster playing out, you would kind of imagine that, if Cheeto's going to leave after this season, then your number 1 and 2 corners next year are going to be Taylor-Britt and Turner. So, you need to see something out of him that can, allow you to have confidence that he can grow into a number 1 role in this league because, Cheeto's your guy right now. Obviously, him kind of being on the mend is a concern. But, if you can go into next year feeling confident that Cam Taylor-Britt can line up against, Tyreek Hill and can line up against Amari Cooper and, maybe George Pickens or whoever is going to be in Pittsburgh, you need to have that confidence. So I think that that's kind of the thing that you need to see from Cam Taylor-Britt this year. He's got to play well against good competition.
And if you're looking at stats, I mean, I think you look at quarterback rating against or completion percentage against. I don't think you look at tackles. I mean, that's not going to tell any sort of tale of how he did.
Yeah, I think even a better stat is like tackle percentage, missed tackle percentage, because if you want to burn Eli Apple, I mean, he had one of the worst missed tackle percentages in the league last year. I mean, he had the worst on the team, one of the worst amongst his position in the NFL. It was like over 12%. So how many tackles are you missing, I guess is the question. Like, are you missing tackles? Where are you missing them? Quarterback rating against opposing quarterbacks, turnovers, obviously. But yeah, that's hard to say because it really just depends on who you're playing and like you said, when you're playing against them. But yeah, I think like Andrew said, the biggest thing for him, and this is not quantifiable, is just how well can you play as a full-time starter. Cheeto's going into a contract year. You'd assume DJ Turner replaces him. And with the Turner, I mean, kind of like with Jordan Battle, I don't think you can really put high expectations on him because he's still probably going to be a backup as a rookie like Hill was last year. So, but yeah, I mean, at some point it's eventually going to be CTB and DJ. I like those initials, CTB and DJ in the backfield. But speaking of initials and nicknames, I wanted to kind of wrap this up. I know we had a flimsy attempt at this yesterday with the offense, but with the Bengals defense, is there a nickname? And if you guys don't have one, it's okay, because guess what? I don't either. Is there a nickname for the Bengals defense, even though we couldn't even figure one out for the Bengals offense? I feel like there has to be one, though. Like, I'm trying to... Actually, before I even say what I'm going to say, do you guys even have one? Because it's on the tip of my tongue right now.
I do
is there
not.
one at all?
No.
I hope somebody does. But I also I think to be a good to be a kind of a defense with a nickname, or to be kind of a unit with a nickname, you have to be really, really good. And while the Bengals defense was good last year, I don't think that they kind of stepped into that role. You need to be really good, and by really good, I mean you need to be elite. Like, you need to be Legion of Boom elite. You need to be that type of defense to kind of earn that nickname. So yeah, I don't have anything, but I hope people are creative. People are more creative than me, so I hope that they figure one out.
As a society, we really have moved away from nicknames. We really have moved away from nicknames. Shame on me, by the way. This includes me myself. I'm trying to think, though. So when I said tip of my tongue, I mean, we know the Hubbard yard dash. That's obviously the play Sam Hubbard had against the Ravens in the wild card round. Like, rumble in the jungle. I'm trying to think, like, is there a way to play off of the words rumble in the jungle? Like, I don't want to say jungle rumblers. That sounds so stupid. But I was thinking of that for like a brief second. Jungle rumblers? I don't know. Jungle something, or like something rumblers. One of those two words has to be a part of whatever the nickname is. But I think our subscribers on Subtext, they need to help us out with this. And speaking of which, if you're not signed up for our Subtext service, which is called Cincinnati Football Insider, make sure you sign up. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals. And it's a 2-week free trial to start. So if you don't like me, and if you don't like Mike, or you don't like Andrew, no offense taken whatsoever. That's why we give you the 2-week free trial. If you stick with it, it's $4.99 a month. We text you and send you messages and alerts on everything going on with the Bengals, right when we hit the locker room, right when we come out of Joe Burrow's press conferences, right when we walk off the practice field, before we even go to Twitter. Because guess what? Twitter's overrated. And I'm saying this as somebody who's addicted to Twitter. So yeah, Subtext is the way to go. Make sure you sign up, and sign up for our Strictly Stripes newsletter at cleveland.com/newsletters. Once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Stay with us Thursday. We've got a special debate between Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. Until then, see you